Hey, we're doing the three-part series on, I talked already about why tears and why numbness, why those are so important in our grief. And now we're going to be talking about why talking. We're talking about the talking. Why the talking matters in our grief and what purpose it serves. And why it's so important to talk. Talking matters. But for a lot of grievers, they don't want to talk because even just saying what happened to them is so hard. And if I were to say this or admit it or say it out loud, it makes it real. And if it makes it real, it makes it true. And if it makes it true, then I might as well just lay down right here and go be with them. All of that is true. All of that is true. I know for a fact, after being a grief specialist for the past 18 years, I know that when grievers come together and they talk, it's huge. When Austin died, I didn't know what to do. But one thing that I knew to be true was that I loved my sister immensely. And that I knew the way I could show up for her was to show up and to listen. Just listen. So I called her every single day. I called Erica every single day. And sometimes we'd be talking about this marker, and sometimes we'd be talking about the weather, and sometimes we both were trying to pretend like everything was okay. And that at some point in the conversation, I would say, "Where are you at today?" She and I both knew that when I said, "Where are you at today?" we were looking for what stage she was in, because that was the tool we had at the time. Now, hear me out. There were a couple things happening at this time. A couple of things were happening simultaneously. One, she was looking to realize and understand what this grief was all about. Two, I was looking to see where I should be in the grief day. So here we come. We're both talking to each other, but we both have different agendas. Like, I want to know where she's at, because based on where she's at is probably where I'm going to be. At least that's what I thought. She was just looking for a place to dump. And we would have these conversations. And then she knew when I said, "Where are you at today?" she was to go down the list: anger, bargaining, acceptance, denial. She was to go down the list and pick one. Then she and I would talk about that one and how it pertained to her. But it didn't matter where we were. She always went back to the beginning of the story. She always went back. Because going back to the beginning was where she could make sense of what happened. And what do I mean by she always went back to the beginning of the story? She always started out with, "You called me. You called me. And then you called me. Or then I called you." We always started from right here. This is what I know to be true now, which I didn't know then. I loved that she was including me in this story. I love that she was including me in the story. But here's the deal, friends. She wasn't ready to accept what had happened. Her brain was not accepting that Austin had died. Her brain was not accepting this fact yet. Not only, okay, her brain was trying to work out what was going on. Let me just say it this way. Her heart hadn't accepted it. Let me just correct that. Her brain was trying to work out what had happened, and her heart hadn't accepted it. So, and there was this thing going on between the heart and the brain. It happens to all of us, where the heart and the brain are on two separate pages. They haven't figured out what happened yet. What the hell is this? What do you mean he died? What do you mean he's not here? My brain is trying to figure it out. It thinks it's smart. So it's sending all of these messages to her. And then your heart is trying to figure out, why do I have this broken heart? Why is there a hole in my heart? Okay? Your brain and your heart. Friends, I want to tell you something. Even if you are with someone and you know that they're going to pass, they have a life-altering diagnosis, and you're with them and you're caretaking them for months, you're still going to have this moment. You're still going to have this disbelief The disbeliefs come from the brain. And then you're going to be sad. And they are not working together. It wasn't their job to work together. They weren't designed to work together. Even though they do, eventually we get them to line up. But in the beginning, they're not that way. So I would call her every day. We would have this discussion. It's my 2:00 coffee time. So thank you for joining me. I'm late and I apologize for that. I'm running late today. Here's the other thing that would happen. When she said, you called me, and then she would start telling the story. I think part of that was because not only was the brain trying to figure out what was going on, it was also part of becoming the detective. It was part of becoming the detective. Grievers do this thing where we become the detective. Now, if you've been with me any length of time, did I spell that right? D-E-C. I spelled this wrong. It looked funny. I'm looking at my notes. Okay. We do this thing when we become the detective, when we're grievers. This happens a lot if our person died by the S word, if our person died by suicide or by murder. We absolutely become the detective. We're trying to solve the case. We need to figure out what happened. So we become the detective. But it is not uncommon for us as the griever to try to figure out, not so much that we're solving the case, but try to understand. We're trying to understand what happened. We're trying to understand. Okay. Where's one of the places that we most commonly talk is in grief support. So I did some research. I was like, when did grief supports happen? The earliest grief supports that I can find happened in 1917. Our journey into the grief history begins in 1917 when Freud published a paper called Mourning and Melancholy. Melancholia means a deep sadness. And he proposed that a bereaved individual must engage in their grief work. So he calls this part the grief work. They must engage in their grief work to properly heal from a loss. Grief work is the process by which an individual breaks their bond to the deceased. He also said you should break your bond, forget they're even there. Okay, all of that part was crazy. That we should move on, go live our new life. But grief work, by which individuals break their bond to the deceased, adjust to their new life, and form new relationships with others. According to Freud, the best way to overcome grief is to throw oneself into the aspect of life and living. We also know that around 1960, grief support groups were started. So that's the earliest form where we have people actually breaking down grief. But in 1960, grief support groups were started to, let me read this to you. Grief support groups or bereavement intervention programs initially emerged in the 1960s, early 1970s, with a program from Boston. And the reason that they came about was more so by religious connection, to help the religious people figure out their loss, figure out the loss of what they were going through, to explain the loss through a religious aspect. And from there, it actually grew. Groups were absolutely replicated the Boston group. So in 1971, we see an elderly Jewish group forming for widows. So from there, people realize, okay, this grief support thing is kind of important. The biggest one you guys are probably familiar with is Grief Share. Okay. What did they find out in the 1960s in the grief support? They found out when we get like people together, just like I was calling Erica every day. I was grieving, she was grieving. When we get like people together, they understand each other. They understand each other. They get each other. They know why being in this group is important because they understand each other and they get each other. Right? Okay. Yesterday I made a video and I was like scratching all over the microphone. I went to re-listen to it and I was like, oh my gosh, please bless these people's hearts. They had to listen to that. Grief is a natural response to loss, but that doesn't mean it's easy. When we're grieving, we often feel overwhelmed, and we feel overwhelmed with our emotions. We feel overwhelmed with our emotions like sadness, anger, regret, and even relief. For some of us, we feel relief. Then we feel guilty about the relief. One of the most powerful ways to navigate your grief is through talking. Sharing your thoughts, sharing your feelings, sharing your memories. But in the beginning, we don't want to talk because if I say it out loud, if I say their name, it means it's real. Talking about grief isn't just about expressing your pain. It's about understanding your emotions. It's about understanding your emotions. You're going to be listening to the pain. You're going to be talking about the pain. You're going to be talking about your person. And you're going to be talking about the emotions. The emotions are what you feel in your heart. The emotions are what you feel in your heart. So you're going to be talking about the emotions and how your heart is feeling. This feels sad. This feels broken. Here's one of the things I know about grief support. You can feel so bad, so deep in the grief. And one other person come in the group. They may be a little bit further than you. They may be behind you. They may be at a different spot than you altogether. And they start sharing their story. And guess what happens? Miraculously, they articulate exactly what you're feeling. The thing that you were not able to put in words between your pain, your person, and your heart. The thing that you could not put into words, they put it into words. And all of a sudden, you're like, that's it. That's what I'm feeling. And then you inch a little bit further on the grief healing journey. All right. When we talk about our grief, we give words to our emotions. Grief can be confusing one moment. We can feel numb the next moment. We can feel like we're crying all the time the next moment. And then this wave of sadness crushes over us. By talking, we're able to make sense of this rather than feeling trapped. We're making sense of this rather than feeling trapped in this. We've got to do all of this to get to here. Something else happens when you just listen. When you just listen to the griever, when you just listen to what the griever has to say, and you're just holding space for them, you change them. You change the griever by just holding space for them. They can feel heard. We recognize patterns when we talk about our grief. We discover what truly we need in our grief. Okay, question. How do you feel after sharing your thoughts and feelings? Do you ever notice that the next day you might feel a little bit more relief? You feel like a little bit of pressure came off? Do you ever feel like, wow, I'm so glad I shared that. Man, that was really good relief. Grief can feel lonely, but talking about it connects us to people. Grief is very lonely. It's very lonely and it's very isolating. But when we talk about our grief, it connects us to other grievers. Whether it's a close friend, a family member, or a grief support group, sharing our experiences help us to understand. Okay, you can receive empathy from other people. You receive comfort. You start to realize that you're not alone. There's something that happens when you realize you're not alone, because when it first starts to happen, even if you have 5 brothers and sisters, you feel like you're the only one going through this. It creates opportunity for deeper connections while you're grieving. It creates opportunity for deeper connections. Sometimes people don't know how to support us until we tell them. But sometimes we can't tell them how to support us because we don't know. But when we get in the group, it all of a sudden becomes crystal clear. I want to tell you guys something else. I want to tell you that this is, I think the other thing about talking that I didn't put in the notes is this. All right. I want to go to here. The emotions is absolutely huge, but I want to talk about this. I want to talk about my own personal experience, right? So when Erica would talk about the event, when she would talk about the event and she would talk about Austin, and she started with, "You called me," and then she would repeat the story. So she was stuck in the story. There's not, in the beginning, we all are kind of stuck in the story. We're telling our story. And we tell our story a lot. And we tell the story over and over again. Here's the thing, that the danger here. If you're not talking about it, you can become stuck in the story and you just stay in the story. So there is this ability to become stuck here, where you're just telling, "And then she called me," and you come over and over again. But there was something else with the becoming the detective that I want you guys to know. By Erica talking about the story and talking about what happened, she was able to break it down piece by piece of the experience of what it felt like to go through this experience, what the energy felt like. It was an out-of-body detective process for her. So it sort of felt like she could break down little pieces by little pieces. So hour one, she would be at hour number one. And then her feelings about that. And then she would say things that people said. And then she would tell me things that Donovan said. And then she would tell me things that she found out by talking to other people. And then she would have a conversation with my dad, and she would tell me what our dad said. And more importantly, she was talking about her feelings. It was like, through her talking about this, she was able to step over and have an out-of-body experience and see her story. I was working with a beautiful lady the other day, and I said, "Well, have you talked to your mother about her experience?" And she's like, "No, oh no, I would never talk to my mom about her experience." Why not? Why not? Why wouldn't you talk to your mom about her experience of you losing your husband? He died from a heart attack suddenly. Why wouldn't you ask her about it? Because there's healing in the story, my friend. Here's mom experiencing it, here's the kids experiencing it, and here's you experiencing it. The story is huge. That's why the talking is so important. But hear me out. You take your little story, your little grief story, and you take it into the bank, and you're like, "May I have a deposit, please?" And she gives you a deposit. And then she comes back and says, "Well, your name's not on the account," or whatever the crap they say. And then here's your little story. And you're like, "Well, my husband died." And you got your story. And she goes, "I'm so sorry for your loss, but I can't open the account," right? Here you are carrying the story because it's so precious to you, right? It's the only thing you got left is a story, and you're walking around with it gently. She didn't care about it. You're in the store, grocery store. They don't care about it. You're telling the people at work, they don't care about it. But then you go to the grief support group, and they're like, "Hey, Sharon, what's your story, girl? Tell us your story. What were people saying? What did your son say? What did your dad say? How did you find out? What did it feel like when you found out? What were the emotions when you found out?" This whole thing needs to be reviewed. It has to be reviewed, cried out, felt before you're ready to complete the relationship to the pain, the loneliness, and isolation. You got to go through the whole story and examine it for yourself And eventually what's going to happen is this heart and brain are going to start lining up on the same page. And once they line up is when you're ready to do the work. Now, how do you get stuck in your story? Because you don't go to support. It's been 5 years. You're still telling the same sad story. You just keep repeating it over and over and over again. You're stuck in when the phone rang. You can't get past it. Sometimes it's because it was so traumatic, we just can't move past it. Sometimes it's because no one has ever listened to our story. Can you believe that? Sometimes it's because no one has ever listened to our story. I can't even believe I'm saying that. Really listen to your story. What was it like? What did it feel like? When you got the phone call, what happened? Erica would tell me the portion of the story where she ran down the hall and my husband ran after her and grabbed her and she just fell into his arms. She was telling me that and what she was thinking. Now, I was having a weird phone conversation. I was talking really loud, but she was down the hall and she was crying and my husband was holding her. And then all of a sudden my husband just started to pray. Like all of that needs to be examined in your story. What's in your story that you have never told anyone? What's in your story that's true that you've never told anyone? What's in your story that you know is true and you are embarrassed to tell it? Sometimes when I'm working with grievers, they get stuck. They get stuck in a part of the story. And sometimes the only way for me to help them move on is to keep going back to that part of the story. And I just throw out different questions. Well, what did you do? Well, what did they do? Well, why did you feel that way? Why is that so important? Why are you crying about that now? I can't even tell you guys how we can dig and dig and dig and find little nuggets within the story. If nobody's going to listen to the story, you're just going to hold on to it. It's part of your pretending. I've told you that grievers will pretend. If no one's going to listen to the damn story, then I'm just going to hold on to it. I'm going to hold it like this, and it's going to be precious to me. And every now and then you'll go somewhere and you'll feel this need to set it down. Okay. Now you got the story. It's your precious story. You've taken it to grief support and you set it down. Your grief support is only for a little while. You were never meant to live in a grief support group. You were not meant to go to grief support over and over and over again. You were meant to do your work and move beyond this pain and go back to living, understanding that your person is no longer here. That's what we're meant to do. But what happened, even some of the support groups I sent Erica to, there was a gentleman in there who had been in there for 33 years. Why? Because no one has taught us how to grieve and move beyond the pain. The grief support serves a purpose. Grief study hall serves a purpose. It's where you learn the definition of grief, what grief really is. It's better than any definition I could write and tell you about. But that's where that happens. It's where you get the support from other friends and family. It's where you honor the memory of your person. Talking about your person isn't just expressing pain. It's also about keeping their memory alive for you and for them. Talking helps you integrate it into the present, their presence into your life, and put their presence in your life in a new way. It allows you to introduce them to other people. I can't even tell you how many grievers I work with, and I fall in love with their person. I absolutely fall in love with their person because their person is just so amazing. And the stories they tell me and their love comes across. It allows you to celebrate your relationship with that person, even though it's painful. It brings a sense of peace because you can talk about them. All right, friends, I think I went on way longer than I wanted to. But I just feel like this is so important. Crying is important. Going through numbness is important. And talking is important. Grief can feel overwhelming, but but talking about it helps lighten the emotional burden. Let me read that again. Grief can feel overwhelming, but you talking about it helps you lighten the emotional burden in your heart. Whether it's with a trusted friend, whether it's with your pastor, whether it's with a support group, whether it's with your grief specialist, or whether you're journaling, expressing your grief through words is an essential step in healing. Expressing your grief through words is an essential step in healing. If you're struggling and you need someone to talk to, please join us on Tuesdays from 1 to 3 Central Standard Time for the grief support group, the Grief Study Hall. For a limited time, we're also doing Thursdays from 10 a.m. to 12 noon. It's absolutely free. I ask questions. I teach a lesson. It is a great place for you to come and be the griever and be supported in your grief. Thank you, friends. I hope this lesson helped you. Talking about your grief is not just about the pain. It's about the healing. It's about the conversation. It's about the connection. It's about the honoring. And I'm so honored to bring this message to you today. I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye.